Thank you for staying with us. Still on terrorism and banditry, the insecurity situation in Nigeria and how it affects women and vulnerable groups. We're joined by Barrister Tony Ojo, who is a legal practitioner, to shed more light on this topic. You're welcome to Signature Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Ojo, are you with us?
I'm here. You.
Now, what do you have to say about this insecurity in the country and Nigeria's justice and protection systems for vulnerable groups, women, children, and people living with disabilities? Barrister Ojo, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Right, so I asked a question about what this insecurity crisis, what you think about the insecurity crisis and what that reveals about Nigeria's justice and protection systems for women and children and vulnerable groups.
Yes, the insecurity actually poses a great danger for vulnerable persons, especially women and children, because we know when there is a conflict, women and children are always the worst hit, the women, children, and the aged. And when you look at the population of Nigeria, we seem to have children and women more. We have more women and children. So you cannot understand the extent of the danger it poses on them, because one, most children, of course, cannot run as fast as adults can. Most women are burdened with taking care of their children. So when there is a conflict, you find out that women and children, they are always the worst hit. They cannot really defend themselves, because of our biological makeup and physiological makeup. Women really do not have the ability, without training. I know we have female soldiers and others who can actually handle weapons, but the majority of the women and children, cannot really defend themselves. So they are left at the mercy of insurgents and terrorists.
Yes, and I also asked about the effectiveness of Nigeria's justice and protection system when it comes to protecting these vulnerable groups in times of insecurity like this.
Okay, so what happened really is that when there is insurgency, when there is insecurity, the judiciary system does not work at its optimal, and that is the truth. So when you bring in protection for a system is not working at its optimal, you will find out that it will be lacking. The protection system will be lacking. So during this period, I can't say that the justice system try as they may, because I know that some parts of the country, the courts are not even sitting because of what? Because of insecurity. So can they then protect children and women?
Okay, looking at the after effects of this, what happens to women after they are returned from kidnapping? Do they go through any rehabilitation, therapy, or are they just abandoned to the society that way?
So unfortunately, our society lacks these processes, for issues like this. It's not because it does not exist, but because we as a people, we as a society, have not put these effective ways of rehabilitating people. I don't know from personal experience that when abductees are released back into the society, there's no how do I call it now? No psychological therapy for them. There is no group that, you know, they sit and talk about the harrowing and traumatic experiences they have gone through. Most people just rely on, oh, they go to church for Thanksgiving after they are released, and then they begin to suffer PTSD. They begin to suffer, you know, the trauma they have gone through. And most times, you know, they are left on their own to take care of themselves mentally. And most times, it does not really all go well.
Now, Barrister, Nigeria has a lot of acts and provisions under the law meant to protect vulnerable citizens. Where do you think that the biggest challenges lie when it comes to fulfilling these constitutional obligations in these issues? What exactly are the challenges?
I will always say the first major problem we have is not that we do not have beautiful laws, like rightly pointed out. We lack the political will to implement these laws. Implementation remains a big problem, a big challenge when it comes to issues like this. Then we have another consequence of lack of political will is funding. You see, we have seen viral videos where soldiers, you know, are sent into the battlefield with slippers, not proper boots. So you also see where the food is not given to them at the right time. So one of the challenges for us is the political willpower to implement these laws and the funding. And you know, lack of funding will also lead to disenchantment by combatants and first responders. So it's a Siamese twins, or like, let's say, hydra-headed monster. It's different angles that contribute to this.
Okay, let's look at the situation of the IDP camps in Nigeria. Are they really safe for women and children and persons living with disability in cases like this?
You know, with all due respect to those who have dedicated their lives, you know, to making sure that people in the IDP camps have a modicum of dignity and safety, I would say that you need to go to the IDP camps themselves, and then you will have an inkling of what people are going through. The truth of the matter is that, like I say, our structure, our institutions are not effective. They are supposed to be supervisory authorities in these IDP camps, but you find out that they're basically left on their own. I do not know where the break in the chain of command, you know, begin to occur, because apparently there's a break in the chain of command, because most IDP camps are left to their own devices, and then you have NGOs and CSOs coming in to fill in the gap, especially when it comes to feeding and, you know, clothing of inmates or people living, you know, displaced persons living in the IDP camps. So no, the IDP camps as it is now does not really cater for displaced persons the way it ought to.
Now, so far we've mentioned some challenges, you know, like earlier on you mentioned the issue of implementation of these laws, you mentioned issue of funding, lack of political power, now this IDP camps not being suitable enough for the people who are there. What do you think can be done in this situation to rectify this problem? What solutions do you think can be effective to improve our situation when it comes to implementation of these laws to protect vulnerable groups and also the IDP camps, the state of the IDP camps?
So I think first of all we need to tell ourselves the truth, and that's the only way we can move ahead. And the truth is that things are not working the way they ought to. We do not need to be like the ostrich that hides itself in the sand, you know, waiting for help to come from elsewhere. Look, the truth of the matter is that we need to give ourselves some bitter pills, and then that's when we can begin to get solutions. And the solution also lies within us. Nobody, no Messiah from outside is going to help us. We need to begin to ask for accountability from our leaders. We need to begin to insist that the right things are done, especially funds budgets are made every year. Where do these monies end up at? We need to ask these questions. These are salient questions that if we do not ask, we cannot get the best of this situation. We also need to make sure that the government begins to exercise the political willpower demand from them. Because the truth of the matter is that either way, whether you are a direct victim or not, we are all victims, because this insecurity affects us one way or the other. We see people who have been moved from the village, the ancestral homes, you know, they cannot go back. Me, for someone like me, I used to travel all over the country, you know, for matters. But a part of the country now I cannot go to, because why? There are these insecurity issues. Nobody wants to be kidnapped. So we need to make sure that the government begins to live up to its responsibility. If that means that we need to go into the street, maybe we have to. The government has a duty to protect us. They have a duty to ensure our safety, our lives, and our properties.
How has the kidnapped children and the abused girls mentally affected them in the long term? And is Nigeria really ready for a trauma generation?
The question you have asked is very salient, because we are going to have a trauma generation if something is not done. Last time we had that 25 girls were kidnapped in Kebbi, 250 girls were initially kidnapped in Chibok. Thank God for international communities that, you know, helped to rehabilitate some of these girls, but not all of them were rehabilitated. We still have some in their captivity. We have 350 children in Niger State still missing. Now, eventually, when all these people are released, what happens to them if we do not do the right thing? They will vent their frustration on the society. Most of them will become so damaged, and a damaged child is a walking time bomb. We begin to see radicalization, because most of these times, if they are not debriefed, if they are not rehabilitated, the poison that they have, you know, brainwashed them where they have been, they begin to see the society as the enemy, and then I'm going to say, with all due respect, our society will fall into a Hobbesian state.
Now, do you believe that decentralizing the security structure, that is including state policing, would help or improve, you know, legal protection for vulnerable population? What do you think about decentralizing security structures?
In as much as I the decentralization apparatus, I have society. Well, sometimes in our own life, especially in a country where tribalism and ethnicity are very, very deep, is very right. Having a decentralized security apparatus may mean that governors, people with vested interests, take control of this and begins to, you know, perpetuate and carry out their own personal interests. As I feel, even if they decentralize our security apparatus, and these problems, the lack of political power, funding, disenchantment of soldiers and officers continues, we will have a repeat of what we are experiencing. So in my own view, I feel that what the government needs to do is to begin to take its own policies serious, begin to fund the security apparatus. In my own opinion, I do not believe that we are ripe for decentralization of our security apparatus.
just before we round up, what urgent gender-focused security and social protection reform must Nigeria implement right now before things get out of hand?
Well, the first thing first is to declare an emergency in security societies, communities, because most of the women and children there are at the risk of not only rape, they are at the risk of being murdered, they are at the risk of being trafficked, because these are security situations always bring room for criminality. There should be a state of emergency. I'm not saying the totality of Nigeria, but those states that we know that there's a high insecurity, that is what I feel now, the short term that can be declared, so that man, children and women will become a party for security agents. Children and women will come the next vulnerable persons to be evacuated from these situations. We need to become very forward and progressive thinking about the situation of these women. Declare a state of emergency in these areas. That is my own humble opinion.
Now, in situations like this, we see issues of human rights coming up, human rights and governance as well. So how do you see that playing out in this security situation in the country? How would you say that Nigeria can balance, human rights protection while also trying to tackle insecurity and making urgent security moves as well, particularly for vulnerable groups?
Okay, so when there is conflict, when there's insecurity, most times there's always infractions of human rights of persons. So in this situation, especially where we are now, I think that the most fundamental of all human rights is the right to life. And that is what the government should be thinking of. What the government, and when I'm talking about right to life, is not just right to existence, right to the quality of good life that every average human being needs. Right to life and right to dignity. As we have these conversations, I am thinking that the government should make sure that in these situations, the balance is that every person, regardless of the gender, especially if they are vulnerable, should
Barrister Ojo, if you're with us, can you continue?
Okay, so I was saying that the major rights when it comes to security, insecurity challenges, especially in this crime, is right to life and the right to the dignity of persons. In this particular instance, government should ensure that every vulnerable person, regardless of their gender, enjoys the right to life. This right to life is not just right to existence, but right to quality. So therefore, government should, at this juncture, make sure that people who are vulnerable are not only evacuated, but are given a safe space, given a safe environment, removed from those abusive environments, to be able to say that yes, they have been able to balance the human rights issues in with insecurity challenges we have.
Now, what about legal education? Because these issues of abuse, like you mentioned earlier, human rights abuse and exploitation of vulnerable groups also usually occur during these periods. So would you say that legal education has a role to play? What role does it have to play in preventing these issues of human rights abuse or exploitation of any form in this time of insecurity? So
advocacy and sensitization has also always been a focal point when it comes to ameliorating human rights abuses, because first responders, combatants, and even the non-combatants, they need to know the rights of everybody. The combatants need to know the rights of the non-combatants, know that they cannot unilaterally, without provocation, begin to shoot into the crowds of non-combatants. They see non-combatants as not people who pose a danger and a threat to them. Then we should also be able to educate first responders on the rights of person. You want to rescue a person. Even as you are rescuing the person, you have to ensure that his dignity of person is also assured. Maybe you have to, where a person is found lying naked, you need to, as a first responder, because of the dignity of that person, look for a sheet and make sure that the person is well covered. So that at the end of the day, after you have finished doing your duty, you will have not just a grateful victim, but a very happy one at that.
Thank you so much, Barrister Toyin, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Barrister Toyin Ojo is a legal practitioner. Of course, we looked at the how terrorism, banditry, kidnapping, and the likes that has been happening in Nigeria affects women and vulnerable groups. And Barrister Toyin joined us this morning to give us her own insights on this particular subject matter. Thank you once again for joining us. This is where we draw the curtains for Signature Morning Enugu, as we will be reconnecting with Abuja Studios. I am Quinsley Rowland.
And this is Uchenna Chimdi Oluoha. Have a nice day.